to the panel, I just wanted to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about Young Women in Bio, about the RTP chapter, and a really exciting national initiative that is underway. So as many of you on this call know, Young Women in Bio started from the Women in Bio National Organization, and we're specifically focused on working with middle school and high school girls who are interested in learning more and being inspired to pursue careers or interest in science, technology, engineering, and math. We work to provide opportunities, education, and mentoring through the activities we plan, and also by getting to know each of the individuals who works with our committee. So we are one of 14 chapters in the US and Canada. Recently, we welcomed the Connecticut chapter into the YWIB family. So if you have an interest in learning more about our future events, as well as looking back at what we've planned sort of over the course of the pandemic, which had to, of course, be completely virtual, but even before that, where we did a lot of in-person events, I think you will be really interested in following us on Instagram, and we have provided the QR code here for you to scan. If you don't have an opportunity to do that right now, Caitlin is kindly going to show this again at the end of the presentation. But we definitely encourage you to take a look at what we've been up to. And I wanted to be sure to mention this really exciting initiative that started last year. This is something that the Young Women in Bio National Organization spearheaded, and we call it the Ambassador Program. It provided an opportunity for each of the chapters to work closely with 2 high school students, and we had the opportunity to work all through the year with 2 young women, Corinne and Alexa, and I know Corinne is on the call today. We have the opportunity to not only learn a lot from their experiences with their respective science clubs and their activities and interests, but also worked with the ambassadors to plan and host an event, which was quite successful and really fun to be involved with. It turns out that the inaugural sort of year was so successful that, of course, now the program is going forward, and we are in the midst of encouraging applications, and we'll be doing that over this next month and a half. So you have until June 1 if you might have an interest in learning more about what it is to be an ambassador for the RTP chapter. You can certainly scan the QR code or take a look at the website. Also, feel free to reach out to myself or Stephanie or Caitlin, and we're happy to tell you more about it. And I think you would be very excited to kind of know what the opportunity can offer, and it gives you, I think, a really good exposure to what it's like working with women who are actively engaged in the STEM field. So really encourage everyone to check that out. And I guess without further delay, I will hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Stephanie Ham, who will be the moderator today.
Thanks, Doreen. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be doing this and to have you here. We have an awesome career panel today. These women are so talented, and I'm so excited to facilitate the conversation. Please use this time as you'd like to ask them your questions. So whether you feel comfortable doing that over video, we would love that, but also feel free to use the chat box. And we really want you to use this time to learn as much as you can about all the possibilities and exciting career paths and ways to get there in STEM. So just a few Zoom housekeeping items. Feel free to have your camera turned on or off. We are recording this event, just so you're aware of that. Please place yourself on mute if you're not asking a question, just to avoid any background noise. And also, if you'd like, you can remove your last name from your Zoom name by just using the rename option in the participant list, and then enter your first name only. And again, ask as many questions as you want. I'm personally also excited to learn about these wonderful careers and how these women got to where they are today. So feel free to send them directly to me or to everyone in the chat box, or use your video. And without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our career panelists. So today we have, I'm sorry if you can hear my dog barking in the background, but today we have 4 amazing panelists who are in science fields, engineering, and medicine. And I'm going to go through and introduce them briefly, and then they'll give you a little bit more background into how they got to where they are today. So first we have Dr. Kelsey Behrens, who's an integrated product development associate at Roe. So Kelsey, if you're willing, could you please give us a little bit more background?
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. And thanks, Caitlin, for inviting us to talk today. And thank you all for spending your Saturday afternoon to hear us talk. So my name is Kelsey Behrens. I'm originally from Georgia, but I moved up here to go to college. So I went to Duke for my undergraduate degree, where I studied biology and environmental science. And I always knew I liked science, but when I was an undergrad, I got a job in a lab. Actually, one of my professors who taught my favorite class was looking for someone to work in his lab, and I was like, "Oh, can I join your lab? I want to learn more about what we're talking about in class." So I really liked working in the lab, and I knew I wanted to go to graduate school. So after graduating with my undergrad degree, I went to UNC Chapel Hill for my PhD. And I got my PhD in toxicology, which is just studying how like all of the chemicals that we're exposed to on a daily basis, how they could maybe affect our health in not so good ways. And while I was in grad school, I found out about Women in Bio and went to a lot of great YWIB events with Doreen and Caitlin. And actually through someone I met through YWIB, was able to get an internship at a local pharmaceutical company. And while I was there, learned all about how drugs are made and all of the different tests you have to do to make sure a drug is safe and that it works before you can put it into people. And I just thought that was really fascinating. I loved my internship, and I knew after that I wanted to go into the pharmaceutical industry. So after I got my PhD last March, I joined where I am now, which is at Roe, which is a contract research organization, which means that we're not a pharmaceutical company, but those companies will hire us to give them advice for how what kind of testing they need to do before a drug can go into clinical trials, or how they should design their clinical trials, or once they have evidence that their drug works in people, how do they use all that evidence and take it to the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, so that drug can get approved. So I really like what I do now. I think it's great that you guys are here today. I think you're getting a great start on like learning about all these different career opportunities, and happy to answer questions later.
Thanks, Kelsey. That was awesome. I've heard great things about Roe, so I'm excited to hear more about your career and experience. So next we have Dr. Laura Lee, who's a research engineer too at Novozymes. And I believe you were going to try to share your slide and do your intro.
I can try.
It's up to you, either way.
Well, now I feel the pressure to try. So let's see. So yes, want to continue. Okay. I'm afraid if I do like the presentation mode, that it's gonna put the main presentation on the other screen. So if everyone can see it just fine like this, I'll keep it like this.
It looks great.
So yeah, so thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm really excited to talk to everybody. I started loving science actually middle and high school, and I really got to explore that through science fairs and thinking of experiments and getting to do it at home and stuff. And it also led me to a pre-college program where I was able to do a university lab internship at UNC Charlotte. And I got to work in 2 labs. One was a fish ecology lab, and then one was a liver studies lab. And I thought that was really cool to see research. And that kind of really pushed me forward into thinking that I wanted to do science as a career. And so that led me to my undergrad, where I went to High Point University, and where I got degrees in biochemistry and physics there, because I love pretty much all different sciences. So, um, and at the time, I continued working through internships to kind of see maybe what fields I like. So I did an internship at James Madison University studying material science, as well as 2 internships at different NASA centers, studying different things there. I then decided to go to NC State for grad school, where I did one last internship at 3M. So I got to see internships kind of in all settings, so university, government labs, and companies. And my research there was studying my research at graduate school was studying thermophiles. So these are organisms that live at really high temperatures. And so we were interested in finding bacteria from hot springs to see how they can break apart plants and maybe using that for biofuels. So I spent a lot of time doing that, and that led me to getting my PhD in my department, which is chemical and biomolecular engineering. And I had only just defended when I got my job at Novozymes. So I've been working here for almost 3 years, which is hard for me to believe. But I'm in the optimization department. So we are kind of a mix between R&D and process engineering. So Novozymes has to make the enzyme, so they do both fermentation and then they recover enzymes from the fermentation. And I have been helping different parts of this process. So I try to make it better, or if they have problems, we're one of the departments they call to try to fix it. So it's something new every day with that. And then I have a little outside of work. I'm just a nerd all around. So I love video games. It's really fun to get in a cool story, and it lets me play with my friends. I love comic books and going to conventions. It's like an extension of Halloween to get to dress up. So that's always really fun. And then I'm really love animals. It's something I really love. And I'm hoping that one of my cats is not going to walk in front of the screen. But I like to do cat rescue. I help with an adoption agency that's local to here. And I would love to do more with that. So that's a little bit about me. And I'm excited to hear everyone's questions.
Thanks, Laura. That's awesome. Yeah, and thanks for sharing some of your outside of work interests. I really love that. All right, so next we have Dr. Marie Onakomaiya, who is a Chief Deputy Scientific Officer at Datacubed Health. So Marie, would you be willing to share a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Stephanie. And it's so great to be here to talk to everyone today. So I think I started my science journey when I was 10, when I decided that I wanted to be a pediatric neurosurgeon because I loved the brain. And I was very excited about thinking of how the brain and all the processes in the brain lead to the things we think about, the way we behave, just everything that's out there about how human beings interact with each other. I wanted to understand where it came from. And so, through high school, if I was to think what were my favorite subjects, it was chemistry, it was biology. I enjoyed physics, but didn't really get it. So I was very much biased towards more of the life sciences, even though, there are parts of life sciences that involve physics. So it was very interesting to think about that path. So I ended up studying biochemistry in undergrad. And through that process, I really saw the value of mentorship. I had 2 professors in particular who really encouraged me in my research interests. So as part of my the program I was in, you had to do a research project for your final year and present it, defend it, almost like a mini defense where you go and tell people what you studied and present the results and tell them why it's important, and you have to write it up and also kind of publish it, and it ends up in a library where no one ever reads it, but I was very proud of it. And that they really encouraged me down a research path and encouraged me to apply to PhD programs. And so I did, and in between I sort of thought, well, I don't want to go to school just all the way through and not really think about what I want next, but I knew that I wanted to do research and not necessarily go to med school anymore, because I just saw how interesting it was to answer cool questions and do experiments, and it just was kind of a different pace for me. So I kind of ended up more towards that path. And then I went on to a PhD in neuroscience because I had taken this really interesting neuroscience class in undergrad that just sort of confirmed all the things I was super interested in the brain, except in undergrad, I kept getting, oh, that's more advanced, that's a more advanced class. This isn't necessarily for this level. So I just kept wanting to just know everything. And so PhD programs were a great way to do that. I got my PhD at Dartmouth College, and there I studied anxiety disorders, looking at how substance use affected different anxiety disorders, whether you were male or female. I used an animal model to look at this. But as I went through that, enjoying working at the bench, cells and pipetting and, all kinds of what you imagine, you have all the test tubes and things like that. But there was a part of me that wondered, how does this help anybody somewhere? I'll publish a paper, I'll write my thesis, I'll think about the outcome, but is this going to impact human health? And at this point, I want to say that I think that there is value in doing science for the sake of science, because as we've seen during COVID, the reason we got these vaccines that just ended up coming out so quickly and being such a revolution is because people studied all kinds of things, not necessarily knowing how it would impact human health in the end. But for me personally, I really wanted to do research that I could see the impact almost as close to the person it would help as possible. And so I ended up doing a postdoctoral fellowship in more clinical psychology work. So this was where I first got interested in looking at how technology could help with neuroscience and psychology research. And so I worked in a virtual reality lab where we had these virtual reality programs that we used to test how people who had PTSD or depression or anxiety, as well as traumatic brain injuries, how could we use these things to assess their function and help them hopefully get better over time. And this was in a military lab, I should say. And so we were working with service members, who'd helped, fight in the wars and come back and are experiencing some of these things. So that was my postdoc. And while I was doing that, I sort of went back to, I really enjoy public health. So I decided to get a master's in public health. And then that led me to the New York City Department of Health, where I worked up until last year studying, primary care and preventive health and how to integrate mental health into primary care. A lot of that was survey research and developing different kinds of questionnaires. And so all of that, I think, brought me to my current role. So Datacubed Health is a digital health company. A lot of what we do is how can we use behavioral science to improve patient engagement and motivation in clinical trials so that you can collect better data, you can keep patients motivated, and at the end of the day, just overall have a positive experience. So I'm on the science team at Datacubed, and I think every day I get to pull from everything from my biochemistry experiences where, we're asked to calculate the return on investment of a specific dose of a drug on something. So then I have to go back to chemistry and say, how do you calculate, the price per, mole of something? And then, I move on to the neuroscience part or the virtual reality part, because we're developing these mobile applications that, we have to think about the behavioral science behind it and how do you make sure you're structuring it in a way that it's accessible to people of different ages. And then finally, in between all this, I did not mention that I did a policy fellowship right after graduate school and learned a little bit about FDA and what they do around drug approval. And so in this current job, we work with pharmaceutical companies who are trying to do clinical trials. So it's helped to kind of have a little bit of that background as well. So I will stop there. I'm excited to answer any questions, but yeah, thank you for having me today.
Thanks, Marie. That was great. I love that your current position kind of encompasses so many different parts of your path and your way that you got to where you are now. So that's really great. So now we have Dr. Julie Steinbrink, who is a Chief Infectious Disease Fellow at Duke University Health. So Julie, if you want to come on and share a little bit more about your career, that'd be great.
Sure, thanks. I'm Julie. Thank you all for having me. I think this whole program is really great. I did not have women in science mentors when I was growing up, not until maybe I got to college or med school. So I think that this is a really awesome program. So I guess my path is a little bit different than everyone else's on the panel, but growing up, I knew I wanted to do something in science. I like science a lot, but I couldn't really figure out what direction I wanted to go. At first, I thought maybe I was going to be a veterinarian. But then I realized that I like talking to people too much. So I ended up going down the med school route, and actually out of high school got into this combined college and medical school program in University of Pittsburgh. I grew up in Pennsylvania. And so did the full 8 years of that. In undergraduate, I studied neuroscience and art history because even though I really like the sciences, I also really like being creative, and I can't draw, but I like music and I like appreciating art. So those were the things that I didn't want to give up that part of myself also with the science going on. And then I went to medical school, didn't really know what kind of doctor I wanted to be or what kind of medicine I wanted to do. I didn't even really fully know what was out there. And so tried a couple of different things. I thought I was going to be an eye doctor or an ophthalmologist, and then realized when I was in the operating room that that was definitely not for me at all. But I really liked general medicine, which was taking care of the whole body and getting a chance again to really talk to my patients, really get to know them, really like to do that diagnosing and problem solving and help work with them every single day. And so after medical school, I then went to University of Michigan for my internal medicine residency, which is the first level of training after you decide kind of what specialty you want to do. And that's usually like a 3-year program. And internal medicine is a little bit more general, but it can be a launching off point for a lot of different fields. You can go into like cardiology or GI or infectious diseases or whatever you're interested in. And again, at that point in time, I didn't really know for sure what I wanted to do, but I liked that internal medicine was open and gave me a lot of different options to be able to do what I wanted to do. And I actually, after finishing residency, actually worked as a hospitalist for a period of time before I decided that I wanted to do infectious diseases. And that was mainly because of a lot of experiences that I had with really great mentors. I really liked, again, the problem solving part of it, getting to treat the whole body, the whole person, really getting to be a detective or problem solver because infections can come kind of in all sorts and shapes and sizes. We have to get very up close and personal with our patients. We ask them, because your infections can be from any exposure, so we ask about do you have any pets or travel or other things that are going on in their lives? And so you really get to know your patients very well, and you really have to think very hard about them. I went to Duke University, and so that's how I ended up here in North Carolina in order to do my training here. And part of that was because Duke is a great program, and also because they have a very strong transplant program. And my area of specialty is with transplant infectious diseases. So patients that get like kidney transplants or heart transplants, or if they've got cancer and they're getting chemotherapy and stem cell transplants, they're prone to a whole mess of different types of infections that other patients may not get. And it can be very tricky to treat them while also treating the underlying disease that they have. But I really like that part of it a lot. And I like the career that I've built for myself, because as a physician, something that I didn't realize early on, but progressively began to learn, was you can be a doctor, but you can also be a scientist at the same time if you want to. You can also be a doctor and just do clinical, like a medical doctor and do clinical care, but you can be a physician scientist as well. And so I also do some research with transplant and infectious diseases as well. And I like being able to keep both sides of that going on. So I guess my main takeaway of my path is that while if you look backwards at my path, it looks like it was linear. It was all meant to kind of build up to go that direction. But at each stage in the path, I kind of didn't really know where I was going and just kind of kept an open mind and kind of listened to got a lot of opinions and listened to a lot of mentors and tried to also follow my gut. So that being said, you don't have to know right away or now or even in 5 to 10 years exactly where your career is going to go, because you'll probably be wrong, because I definitely was wrong multiple times. So, but I'm very happy with where I've ended up now. So.
That's great. I love that messaging, and I totally agree. Keeping an open mind through the whole process. And I also think it's so interesting that just like one experience of being in the surgery room for the eye surgery can make you shift your whole opinion. So yeah, thank you, Julie. So right now I kind of wanted to shift gears a little bit and ask our attendees a little bit more if they're willing to share either through the chat box or hop on video. We'd love to see you and hear you. Just to learn what you're interested in hearing about today. Is there anything specific in careers that you think you want to pursue at this time, that you want to hear more about from our panelists, or just in general, anything you're interested in learning about right now? So feel free to put in the chat box or to hop on video. We'll give a few minutes to get some thoughts from our attendees. Anybody want to share? You can also raise your hand if you want to do it that way. Okay, I'm interested in neuroscience and psychology. That's great. I think we have some great panelists for that as well. Anyone else? All right, we can hop into some questions then and get the ball rolling if that's all for now. But yeah, so thank you so much for the intros. I think you all did a wonderful job. Oh, we have some more coming in. I guess I have to learn to be patient. Maya said, let's start with some questions. How do you get the hands-on experience to figure out what you're interested in? That's a great question. And let's kick off with that. Did one of the panelists want to start with that question? How do you get the hands-on experience to figure out what you're interested in? Laura, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, okay, I can start.
Thanks.
I mean, so a lot of my hands-on experience came through internships, and like I had a wide variety of internships. So even like material science, the first one I got, I honestly like, that's probably not on my highest ranking of things, but it was really cool. It's through a research experience for undergrads. It's an REU. And that program, at least from that school, was specifically designed for people with no experience. Because sometimes internships, like they want experience to have an internship, and you're like, I got to start somewhere. And it was designed for that. And it was really cool. I got to see a lot. And it actually led me to a paper that I got. I never thought I would have got a paper from that. It led me to another internship years down the road, just for some experience I saw. So being open to just opportunities you wouldn't think you would be like is also just good in general, having an open mind. You can also, I mean, it's harder now with COVID times, of course, but like I was interested in being a veterinarian too. Like that's what I wanted to do at first. And I shadowed a vet. I written or called a vet clinic and said, can I come for a day and hang out? And not everyone might be able to do that, but you're not going to know until you ask. So if you're near a university or near, whatever, job you're interested in, like I said, COVID makes it a little harder, but assuming things are slowly going back to normal, I'm sure like for my job, I think there'd be ways to work around, have people come visit for a day if it could work out. And that was really valuable to me. It showed me I did not want to be a veterinarian because the first thing that morning we did was put a dog to sleep. And I realized I loved animals, but that was really hard. And the people that can do that, I have to give them a lot of credit because it's a lot. So yeah, if you're interested in something, just look around what's local to you, or if not, you can just write them. So one thing I wish I had known earlier on, and it's common sense now, I think, but there's something called like an informational interview. And I didn't know this until I was at 3M, but when I was there, my boss was telling me to go to other people in different departments, the different management, and just set up time where I can talk about their jobs and everything. And I really wish I'd done that way earlier for anything like that I've been to, because they were pretty honest with me. They told me like what was good, what was bad. They had no reason to really lie to me because they weren't like trying to get me to come. So I learned a lot from that experience as well.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, to just reach out and don't be shy, because I think more people are willing to help help you learn what it's like to be in their jobs, or have you shadow them, especially as high schoolers trying to navigate that stage. Do any of the other panelists want to touch base on that question about gaining hands-on experience to figure out what you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just sort of piggyback onto the same things that Laura said. I think, especially for medicine, you know, shadowing is like a really great thing if you can do it. Especially, I know during COVID times that can be difficult, but one of the things, you know, when I was still trying to figure it out, I even asked some of my own doctors. I was like, I asked my eye doctor and I asked my dermatologist and my family doctor, can I just like spend a day seeing what you do and that sort of thing? And then from there, as you start to meet some people, you can start to they can introduce you to more people, or you can figure out what you want and what you don't want. And it can be really scary to ask the first person, even if it's someone that you already have some familiarity with. You know, you're like, oh, I don't want to be seen as stupid, or I don't know what's going on. I don't want to be in the way. But really, it ended up being invaluable because you really don't know what you want to do until you actually kind of get your hands in there and you actually start trying to do those sorts of things. You can, in theory, you know, some things can seem really cool and maybe certain aspects of it might be really great, but it's not to actually start to see the day-to-day of what your job would really look like that you start to get a little bit more of a feel for it. So at least from the medical side, something like shadowing it would be a great opportunity.
Thanks, Julie. And we had a comment of, I'm interested in becoming an ER doctor and maybe working the policy side of healthcare. So I don't know if Marie maybe has some input on the policy, gaining experience in that, the shadowing opportunities that you might want to share.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think policy is such a big area now, and trying to think about how to get into that or how to break into that. My path, I ended up using my network, if that makes sense. So when I was graduating for my PhD, and, you know, I was tired of being at the bench, you know, as I said, pipetting and doing all these things, which again was cool, but I felt like I'd gone so deep into the science and I couldn't really see how I was helping people. So at Dartmouth, they had a lot of really, really great programs. And I know, you know, that's sort of a couple of years ahead of where you are, but I think about it as wherever you are getting an education, people, you know, especially your teachers, are very interested in trying to help you advance. And so talking to them and just finding out, you know, what they know about through their networks and trying to tap into that, I think I found really valuable. And so I sort of joined this group that was very focused on healthcare consulting and, you know, how do you prepare for a healthcare consulting interview? You do what they call these case interviews. So you basically use a logic framework, or what they think of as a problem solving framework, to answer any problem. For instance, they say, how many cars do you think are in New York City? And you have to use a logical, well, how many people are in New York City? How common it is to have a car, that kind of thing. But through that process, I met people who then introduced me to someone else. And then that person introduced me to someone at the company I ended up joining, which was Avalere Health. And they actually are a healthcare consulting firm that developed an FDA policy fellowship just for people who had PhDs and were interested in dabbling and not necessarily committing to a career in consulting. And so for me, that was perfect because I got exposure to that world. It was really interesting, but I think very similar to what Julie said, I quickly realized that I missed research and I missed being able, you know, to ask those questions and do experiments and things like that. So after that, I went into a postdoc. But then through my postdoc, I met someone else, and that person, she had a startup that actually focused on mental health policy, a lot of which, you know, this is everything from the National Institutes of Health to the Substance Use and Mental Health Administration. They're all these government organizations that have various programs. They also give out grants and things like that. And so that was another experience that that sort of got me into policy and thinking about that. So anyway, all of that to say, very similar to what both Laura and Julie said, you know, use your network. If you're interested in a specific thing, like see if someone you know knows someone And if not, I think sometimes even just writing to an association. So you guys are part of Women in Bio, but, you know, could you look at the society, you know, the American Public Health Association, and see if they have a program, you know, around policy that you could partner with or join or do a summer. You know, there's so many of these things out there. And, you know, I'll tell you, people love hearing from young people who are interested in this stuff. So you're already ahead of the game.
Definitely. Thank you.
I would chime in too, just that, you know, if you think you might want to be interested in policy or maybe something, you know, extra in addition to science or whatever you think you want to study, like when you're going to college, you know, a lot of universities have like public policy schools. And I know, like, at least in my experience, both when I was an undergraduate and in grad school, just because I was studying science, I could also take classes like at other schools. So like at UNC, you know, I took school classes in the public health school and met public health students that way. And so you can always just kind of, you don't have to stay in your lane necessarily if you don't want to. If you want to branch out and learn more and meet people who are studying that sort of thing and see if you like it too. It's all about just kind of being open to those opportunities and looking for them.
Definitely. Thank you, Kelsey. Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, definitely don't have to say it's not a linear one lane career path many of the times. Thank you. Yeah, and if anybody who's typing in the chat, if you want to pop on and ask your question directly, feel free. I don't know if Lauren wanted to directly ask her question, but if not, I can go ahead. Lauren, want to ask it? Okay, so Lauren said, I'm interested in getting into a BS-MD program. I think someone attended the program at the University of Pittsburgh. I'd love to hear more. And I think that was Julie.
Yeah, that was me. I'm glad that to kind of bring that up, because that was something that I didn't know about till it was almost too late when I was in high school. But so there are a lot of different ways you can go around to getting a medical degree. Some people know right away from high school. Some people decide when they're in college. Some people even take non-traditional routes and do a whole career, and then medicine is their second career. So the way that I did it, I'm happy to talk about it, but just letting you know that if you don't know right this second that you want to be a doctor, there's still plenty of time to make that decision, because it is a big one to make. But I did do the program at University of Pittsburgh. There are a couple different programs, I think, around the country, and certainly it's been a few years since I was in high school, so I'm trying to remember kind of exactly the full details. But so I applied to University of Pittsburgh and University of Rochester. They both had programs. Pittsburgh was the full 8 years of 4 years of college, 4 years med school. And Rochester, it was 3 years college, 4 years med school. I elected to do the Pittsburgh one, because I was in Pennsylvania already, and two, because I didn't want to give up I didn't want to sacrifice my full college experience. I wanted to be able to enjoy college. I wanted to be able to, study art history and other things, and there would be no way to do two majors or do other creative interests if I wanted to take all the prerequisite required science courses to get into med school. I wanted to do extracurriculars like choir and things, and so I elected to do that program. It's the full 8 years, and you are accepted into med school after that, as long as you meet certain requirements. Like if you keep up you can major in whatever you want, but you have to keep your GPA and your science GPA above a certain level. You still have to do some of the research and the volunteering and clinical experiences that traditional pre-meds would have to do. But a major plus was that I didn't have to take the MCATs, which was the major med school admission tests. And so getting away from any standardized tests was very awesome for me. But then at the same time, there were 4 people in my class, 4 girls actually, which was really awesome. But of those 4, 2 of us ended up entering med school at the same time. One ended up doing an MPH and then coming back and doing med school. And then one actually ended up dropping out of the program and choosing an alternate career, which is also fine. The program it wasn't like you didn't sign a letter guarantee that you had to go to med school after it. It just offered you an avenue to be able to do that. I think for people that want to do that, it's certainly a way to do it. And I'm happy with the decision that I made. you have to show, a commitment to science and medicine. And certainly by being in an organization like this, you guys have already done that. I've also been on the other side and done interviews for future applicants for this program, and, showing, like if you've done, as you're able to, clinical shadowing experiences, again, hard during COVID, but like show that you've truly put in a lot of thought and work and kind of background into that. So some people have had, built upon their like science fair experiments and done little research things. Some people have been able to progress a little bit in like some clinical things. Some people have different backgrounds, maybe they got into it because a family member was ill and that got them passionate about it and that sort of thing. So I know these programs are still going strong, and I think the biggest thing is making sure that you kind of show a strong background in medicine and show that you've truly thought about it. And this wasn't like a whim decision. This was something that you are truly passionate about. But then at the same time, I like these programs because they also give you it takes a load off to know that you're already in medical school. So you have a little bit more freedom and flexibility to do other things when you're in undergraduate and such. If you've got more specific programs or questions about the program, I'm also happy to talk about it. And I can only really speak specifically to the Pittsburgh one and to other programs, but.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, that's very helpful. Hopefully, Lauren, that answered your question. So the next question, it's more of a comment, and I was kind of thinking of putting in the form of question, but it says, I'm interested in trauma surgery and military medical operations, but I'm not sure what path to take to get there. So I know we talked about, shadowing and kind of using that as a tool to explore different career options. And so maybe we can just kind of ask a broader question of what other tools would you recommend or that you use yourself to kind of combine your different interests into field? I think everyone here kind of has a really unique career that is encompassing a lot of different skills. And so you can speak to that a little bit in addition to, I know we talked about the shadowing and things like that, but anything else to add?
I guess I can start. I'm trying to think. I think you don't have to worry. I think someone already mentioned it. You don't have to worry so much about the direct path to get there because there's lots of paths to get to the same spot. And that's one thing, if you can't shadow, or at least you don't have to shadow, you could just write somebody and ask them what path did they do to get to that spot. And most people are happy to talk about themselves. So, you'll find that even if you ask, I think 10 people in the similar positions, I bet everybody took a slightly different path to get there. Even my path's not really straightforward. I liked stuff that was interdisciplinary. So all my things are kind of combinations of sciences, and even where I'm at now. But if I had known, I think in high school, that I was going to end up here, I would have never guessed. I guess I would have been some sort of science researcher, but this particular field, no. So I think you don't need to worry as much. I would just, if you couldn't shadow, you can even write different doctors and ask maybe just what paths they took. But I think you'll take more classes, you'll learn as you go along too. When you get professors, you can ask them. So you don't have to have all the answers like right now in high school, because that's really overwhelming to think that way, and you really don't. Even if you misstep, and I'm sure you can go on the right path. There's different people that have taken side steps and have gone. There's even people in my program that they went to one university and decided they did not want to study that PhD program anymore, and they came to ours and they switched, and it took a little bit longer, but I'm pretty sure they're a lot happier now where they are.
Yeah, I'll chip in and say too, like I didn't even know my job existed until like 3 years ago. But I just kind of happened. I was in grad school and got an email about this a class you could take online about the field I'm in, which is called regulatory affairs. And I was taking this class. I was like, oh my gosh, this is really interesting. Let me learn more. And I did the thing that we've been talking about of just talking to people, just random people I knew from school or friends of friends. Just, hey, could I ask you a few questions about your job? And I think all throughout, especially when you're a student, people love talking to students and helping students out. So yeah, I would just say to kind of keep an open mind about if something, pops up through your school or your program that you're in, you're like, oh, I don't know what this is, but let me go attend this event or listen to this person talk and learn more. Maybe you'll find out you don't like it and you're not interested, but maybe you will be interested and it'll kind of lead you down a path that you didn't even know about.
Thanks, Kelsey. Appreciate that. Any other panelists have anything else before we kind of shift gears to a new question? Yeah, go ahead, Marie.
I was just going to comment on the military part of this. So I know someone asked this question specifically, CV. I just kind of wanted to say there is a military medical corps. And so if you are interested in that path, you know, going whether through the military where they will actually pay for med school and you can do your residency in that program and kind of go through that path, that's certainly available. The Uniformed Services University, for example, in Maryland, and they do amazing research. So when I was doing my postdoc, I did my postdoc at Walter Reed. And so my mentor was actually a professor at the Uniformed Services University. He was a military doc and, you know, just did some really amazing work. And so there's certainly that path open, especially I think if you are interested in being a military doctor, working in, I think it's like military medical operations, that's one way. I knew other people who, you know, went the traditional, you know, went to med school, did some stuff outside of the military, and then took on orders and became a military doctor. So, you know, like everyone's been saying, there's so many ways to get there, but there's actually an entire like track, if that's something you're interested in committing to early on, that, you know, they pay for med school, you know, you'll do your residency and go on to be posted to all these different things. So
That's great. That's like really helpful info. Thank you, Marie. All right. And then so I think Ella kind of asked a similar path question. So hopefully I hope that we addressed it. If you have a more specific question, Ella, about kind of, you know, figuring out, you know, I think the main message is it doesn't have to be a linear path, and the more exposure, the more people you talk to, the more you learn about what you might want to do. And there's a lot of jobs out there we don't even know exist. You know, so there could be a job that you don't even know about that might be the right one for you. So I was just going to ask a broad question about what a typical day is in each of your jobs, if you could describe the up and downs of your job. So we have this great panel, so maybe this can give some good exposure about what these careers are like.
Okay, I can start since I've been doing that a lot. So my day is very variable. That's what's really cool about my job. I really don't know what's going to happen every day. With COVID, it makes things difficult. I do a lot more time working from home now, but I'm going to just pretend COVID isn't happening just to kind of give an idea. So like I said, I work to solve problems. That's all my do. So there's stuff that I'm working on currently to kind of see like, how can I improve? So sometimes I'm in the lab doing lab trials. We do everything on small scale so we can help process engineering do stuff on their larger scale. So trying to do on a small scale, see if it's going to work. Then, you know, analyzing the data on the computer, working with the techs in our lab as well. So there's still a lot of hands-on, and then there's a lot of data analysis. And then sometimes production will say, hey, we're having all these issues and we need all hands on deck. And then you're suddenly pulled into that. And so then I'm going into production, you know, taking samples, running more experiments. So there's that. And then there's also the boring stuff with like meetings and all. And sometimes those are really great and sometimes they're not. So it's just part of it. But it's really cool for me because since ours is a global company, I mean, we're having meetings from our headquarters in Denmark. So you'll get to hear people from over there, or I talk to people in Nebraska, or sometimes we even get there China people as well, which can be an issue with time zones. But yeah, it's really varied. You never know quite. You could have a plan for that day and you're like, this is what I'm going to do. And then it gets completely derailed. And I like that actually for the most part.
Thanks, Laura. And actually, Ella asked a follow-up question I think while you're talking might be good for you to address. She asked, what is it like to research something? I really like working with other people, and I don't know if research in labs are with a team of people or if it's kind of isolated.
Okay. Yeah.
Hold on, let me jump in real quick. Laura, can you explain to everybody what Novozymes does? Because I'm
Sure.
not sure if the girls know exactly what you're
Okay. So Novozymes, so we produce enzymes, and these go into a variety of different industries. So these are just proteins that can help reactions go along. So these can go into detergents, or animal feed, biofuels. I'm forgetting some other things. There's a lot. So really any place instead of a chemical, you could use a biologic solution. That's kind of what our goal is to do. And so there's different sites. So my site is actually the North American headquarters. And so we do production of the proteins. And so we grow up different organisms. And then you get this massive protein and organism and all this goop, and you have to separate out your proteins so that it's actually usable. And so we have stages to recover our proteins as well. And then we ship them off to get formulated into like the right stuff that actually ends up in customers' things. So hopefully, is that clear? Okay, cool. So research, I think it's gonna vary in depending on like where you're doing your research at. I mean, sometimes my undergrad at the time was really small. So when I did research there, it was just me and my professor. But like in grad school, we're actually a decent sized lab. So we had a lot of students working together, and then we had our own undergrad army that we worked with too. So it was a really cohesive group. And that's kind of still been that's still gone to my career. So right now, I want to say we have 13 people. We had some movements. I'm trying to remember that's the right number. And we have both sides. So like we have the fermentation side and the recovery side. And I started recovery, and I'm actually training now to be fermentation. But we work together as a unit. So there's times I'm in the lab where it's just me. But then other people come and stop by and like, what are you doing? And they check it out. And so that's some of my favorite moments when we're working on something just like spontaneously and like talk about it. So it can be very collaborative if you want it to be. It doesn't have to be just alone, but there are positions I'm sure where you just want to be by yourself, just analyzing something, you can do that too. So it definitely doesn't have to be isolated.
Thanks, Laura. That's great. Yeah, I think we can continue just everyone still describing their job and their day-to-day and ups and downs. There's a few other questions that we can ask as to the specific people when they're talking. And in general, there was a question if anyone's seen any dramatic change in their roles or research to address the pandemic, such as vaccine research. But yeah, I don't know if maybe Kelsey wants to do a day-to-day and summary for us.
Sure, yeah.
Thanks.
So similar to Laura, I kind of don't necessarily have a typical day. I do, in my current job, I spend a lot of time actually writing, which you might not necessarily think. I spent all this time in the lab going to graduate school for a science degree, but actually that I also like reading and writing a lot. And so that was something I was looking for as well in my job search. So I'll spend a lot of time writing documents for, like I said before, we have clients who hire us. So I'll be writing the results maybe of a clinical study or writing up pieces of documentation that our clients are going to send off to FDA to convince FDA that their product or their drug is both safe and effective and that people should be allowed to use it. Since we do have clients, because you can also do my job like just at a pharmaceutical company and actually working kind of in-house, but we are more of like a consulting company. So we're also working with our clients a lot. And I think maybe if any of you have like a customer service job now, it's a lot of the same kind of just people skills you need. Maybe sometimes people aren't happy to hear your advice, but you just kind of have to learn how to like navigate that and like working on teams. And I really like that because we're getting to see a lot of different problems and work in a lot of different types of therapeutic areas to help our clients make medicines that can help people live better lives. And then I think just as far as, I know there's a question on how things have changed or if things have changed from the pandemic. I would say not personally for me. And I think I haven't been involved in any of the vaccine trials or anything like that, but it has been really interesting as someone who is kind of starting out in this field to see how it's all been playing out. Something I think that especially you all, if you're looking for jobs in clinical research down the road, I think one huge change that we're seeing is that we're shifting, and a lot of these clinical trials now are moving, it's called virtual. So maybe if you want to participate in a clinical trial, maybe you live, 2 hours away from Duke or UNC, and it's really hard for you to drive in if you have, cancer, you're taking this investigational drug. Maybe not for cancer, but for certain things, like you can actually do it virtually, and you don't have to go into the doctor's office all the time. And I think it's been a learning curve for a lot of these companies that are switching to that, but I think that's the way it's moving forward, and it's really helping open up and give people more access who want to participate in these clinical trials. It's making it easier for them, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that moving forward. As a direct result, I think that we would have gotten there eventually if it weren't for COVID, but I think just the fact that we weren't able to go into the doctor's office for so long, I think it's really accelerated it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I didn't even think about that with the clinical trials, but that's really interesting. And I hear you with client interactions. I have some of that in my job as well. So yes. All right. Julie, would you mind sharing a little bit more about your day-to-day? And I think we had a specific question for you. What is it like to balance the research and seeing patients?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. Similar to kind of the theme that everyone's been saying, my day-to-day varies very much from day to day and has varied a lot within the past year. And again, that's something that I really enjoy because it keeps me on my toes, keeps me from getting bored. So balancing clinical and research can be done in a lot of different ways, depending. Some people lean a lot more towards the clinical and only a little bit of research. Some people lean a lot more towards the research and only a little bit of the clinical. Some people try to do balance both, and it kind of all depends on where you find yourself landing. And you don't need to know that right now, but you sort of figure it out as you go along. So right now, I can spend so once a week I have a clinic that I see patients in. And those are my transplant patients. And then also I spend about 20 weeks rounding in the hospital as a consultant as well. And on each time that we're on service, we have an attending, we have a fellow, sometimes we also have a medical resident and a medical student. So you've got a whole team that you're working with. So it's very collaborative. And I like that part of it. So our work is all so infectious diseases in general in the hospital is all consulting based. So if the primary team, like say the ICU team or the medicine team or the emergency room has a question from an infectious disease perspective, then they ask us to see them. And specifically if it's a transplant patient, then they ask our team to come see them. And so those consults, so the day will depend on how many of those consults we get. And then we go and see those patients in the hospital. We ask their questions and then we interact with each of the medical teams and talk about what's going on with the patient. It's kind of, again, similar to what Kelsey was saying about customer service relations. Because you're in a consulting role, your recommendations can be perceived differently depending on what the team is. And sometimes both sides can have something to weigh in. But even in medicine, you'd think that there's only one direct path that you can do for each patient, but there's actually lots of different ways you can treat patients that are still safe and beneficial for the patient. So I like that teamwork aspect of it. When you're working in the hospital in those days, it can be a little bit hard. You have to kind of put your research to the side, but then on the weeks that I'm not on there, or you can have like a research assistant, or you can have other people who try to help you. In my research team, I have a primary mentor and a small group, and then we also have a larger group, and we meet as a lab weekly. Some of that work, so a lot of my work is with genomics and infection, and diagnostics for infection. So genomics are like genes of the patients that get infections. And so sometimes during the days, I'll be picking up blood samples from my patients from the clinic and taking them to the lab and processing them. And then we also do sequencing of the RNA, and then some days I'll be spending doing studying and analyzing the genomics results from that RNA sequencing data. So that part can depend on where we are in the process. So the balance of clinical and research can be challenging, but it can be rewarding, and it kind of depends on which direction you want it to go. Some people can spend more time being more bench-based science, but still be clinical, or some people can do more like clinical trials, or they can do more just data analysis and not direct patient interaction. In general, for the COVID pandemic question, I guess my job kind of completely changed in the last year. I think partly because at the beginning, when I first entered infectious diseases, a lot of people didn't even really understand what I did for a living. People didn't really know ID as much as a field. And then now with this pandemic and everything, Fauci's become a household name, and now everybody knows what infectious diseases is, for better or worse, almost too much. And so I think that, so first of all, with a lot of our appointments changing to telemedicine appointments, that was one thing. So a lot of, trying to treat patients by interacting with them through the computer, which is harder for physical exam side, but it's also a lot more convenient from sometimes our patients travel from out of state, or there's COVID restrictions and things. And so that can actually be really helpful. Also, some of the theme of our research changed to a little bit of a COVID focus for a period of time. So there were a few months early on in the pandemic because we were doing genomics and looking at genes of specific infections, that was our general theme, but now that shift specifically to COVID. So I was donning PPE with my lab colleagues, and we were going into homes of people who had COVID and collecting their blood and swabbing their noses and doing the hands-on things there. So we did that so that we could build up our repository and study that and be able to write that up. So that was something that I was not doing. I was spending more time in the lab and writing up stuff, but not directly getting the samples and going into patients, doing the whole PPE and the whole part of that up until COVID. And then I think now things are trying to sort of readjust back into priorities and kind of getting back into like what we were doing beforehand. But I think there's definitely appropriately a real shift. I don't do anything specifically with vaccine research, so I can't really talk about that. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Yeah, I think the clinical, doing clinical work and research was always interesting to me because it feels like it has a real translation power, because you have the patients and then you also are doing the research. You get to see it happening, which is really cool, from bench to the clinic. So thank you.
No, for sure. And I would even say the other way around as well. There have been so many times that my clinical side has inspired my work. And I'm like, hey, this is really interesting, question about these hepatitis C patients. Well, what can we learn about it? Well, I might as well go to the research side and work to figure that out.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's a good point. Marie, do you want to share a little bit more about the ups and downs of your day-to-day and maybe how it's changed a little bit in the past year, or if you've had any involvement in the vaccine?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like everyone said, day-to-day certainly differs. It's funny, Kelsey, the entirety of what Datacubed does is around virtual clinical trials and trying to improve adoption of that, and how can we improve patient engagement around that. My specific role at Datacubed, we as the science team are always thinking, how can we improve our mobile platform and make it more engaging, and use behavioral science principles, behavioral economics principles to reduce what we call friction in how patients or participants are in clinical trials. So what I mean by that is, I sit with my team and we brainstorm. We have a team of designers, a team of engineers, in addition to, all the commercial teams that you might expect to be there. And everyone sort of sits and we think through, okay, how can we make this page in the app, more easy to use, more engaging. They create these maps and things like that. And then those of us on the science team think about, okay, a behavioral science principle around maybe setting defaults. So how do you get someone to opt in instead of opting out of something? These are these sorts of, very abstract concepts. How can we make it very concrete? And so that involves a lot of discussion, a lot of collaboration. And then other days, I'm sitting on client meetings. So we have a lot of clients from the pharmaceutical industry, biotech industry, that kind of thing, and some CROs actually. And they are running a clinical trial using our platform. And my job is to help them think through the best way to implement that on their platform. So it's also collaborative, but I have to sit, read the protocol, think about how I would use our mobile application to run their, the parts of their protocol that we are using to collect what we call patient-reported outcomes or PROs, ePROs, that kind of thing. So, can we build it on the platform? How would we present it? All those kinds of things. So there is a lot. I think one of the things I really like about my job is that from day to day, things change. And then a big part of my job as well is writing. So we write a lot of white papers. We, do blogs. So I work with the marketing team to, present webinars. They're just things like that where you kind of get to play a separate role from, just sitting in science. I think I've been very lucky to experience the range of, at least within the life sciences. I worked in a bench lab in grad school and undergrad. So I learned all the things for the most part that you would need to do in a bio lab. And in that, there was a lot of individual work, but I think there were aspects of it where, the lab manager would teach me how to do something, a postdoc would teach me how to do something, and then I do it, and then we talk through how the experiment went and, think about what does it mean. And so there were elements of both collaboration and working alone. And then when I did clinical research, this was more in my postdoc, a lot of that was around data, and this was working with people. And so how do you obviously interact with people to collect data, but then also when you get the data, how do you analyze it and present it? So for that, it was, you go to conferences, you meet people, you work with, other lab members to think about the work you're doing. So I think it's always a balance of individual work and teamwork. But what I really like about the path I took is I felt ownership of what I was doing. So it was my experiments, it was my work. I was able to sit with it and think about it and then talk to someone about it and turn it into something meaningful. So I still get to do that in this job. And that's kind of, I think the perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Marie. Yeah, and I think the main message is day to day is so dynamic in many of these careers, and often, job descriptions are just kind of text of what they might be, and you don't really know till you're in those positions and living in them. And also you can make a job your own. You can really tailor it and make it your own. And so Corinne has a question, and I think she's willing to come on video and ask it. So Corinne, if you're Hi.
Hi. Yeah. So right now I'm a senior in high school. I'm looking to go into undergrad, probably in biochemistry. And then after that, grad school, maybe in like engineering or I don't know. We'll see when I get there. But I was just wondering, what did you guys do in undergrad to prepare for graduate school? Like what sort of things were you thinking about?
Thanks, Corinne. Laura, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm trying. So, yeah, I don't know if I even knew. I think I knew I wanted to go to grad school, like out of high school. I didn't realize you get paid for grad school. That was something like no one told me until like my professor said I mean, it's not a lot, but you still get paid to do it for most things. I think the most I could recommend is just being in a lab, making sure that, I mean, at least if you're going, especially like about chemistry or engineering, you're gonna be in some sort of lab for grad school. So making sure, that you're okay with that you enjoy doing that. I think also writing stuff and getting to learn writing skills is really good because you're going to be writing a lot more, than you're going to realize. Because the last part, especially in my PhD, was writing up all the results, because if you can't communicate those results, it doesn't even matter. So preparing myself to like be able to read science papers. We had a class at my university for like kind of writing and doing research. So there's something like that you have at your university, I would definitely recommend that. Or if there's chances to, like if you do any sort of research for your class, to present it. We had several different little talks you could do. that's also really helpful because you want to be able to go to conferences and talk about your research when you're in grad school. So doing that type of things is, I think that was helpful that I had some experience with. Still had some work to do but I at least had a starting point that I didn't have to start from square zero.
I think too, like when you're an undergrad, if you're working in a lab, there will probably be graduate students in your lab. So talk to them, see what is it like being a graduate student at this university. Something when you're applying to grad schools, I mean, when you know what program you want to apply to, you can Google and look up the labs. You can email other graduate students and see what's it like being a grad student at your university. When I was in grad school, I had just random people emailing me wanting to talk, and I was always happy to talk to them because I did the same thing when I was an undergrad, right? So also just hearing about those experiences is valuable because it's personally going to be valuable for you and you're making a decision. But then also I think that when you're applying to graduate schools, it's really great to show that you took that initiative, and you can write about it in your applications. Well, from speaking to students or faculty, here's what I know. And when you interview for grad school, it's the same thing. So it's benefits you in a lot of ways.
I'll just add one thing to that. I know people said work in a lab and things like that. Totally agree. I think if you can get paid for it, that's even better. So a lot of schools will allow you to join as a research assistant, or, even if you might start off doing teaching assistant work and then you get to know a professor and see what lab, what kind of research they do. I don't know what schools you're thinking of or things like that, but I think if you're interested in going to grad school, going to a school that has graduate programs is like very helpful for that, because then you will get exposed to those kinds of people. So I'd encourage you down that path. But I think also, if you're in a place that has multiple universities, like don't restrict yourself to just your university as a lab to work in. Some labs will even let you shadow people for a while or do a summer project. And so those are certainly, I think, very helpful in preparing you. I'd say, do a senior, I don't know if there are senior theses or things like that different schools might have as part of their programs. I think it's very valuable to have that on your application because it shows you're interested in research. You learned how to ask do a hypothesis and ask research questions. So I'd say take any research opportunities you see if you can do an RA job like at some point in your undergrad career. And, those are sorts of the things that people look out for.
I would say I would recommend, continually asking questions and finding mentors and advice from multiple different levels, kind of echoing what some other people have said, but like, obviously you'll have like a primary mentor or person who may help give you advice and that sort of thing, but also finding like peer mentors, whether there's an interest group similar to like your Women in Science group or the YWIB programs, but like a similar chapter at your school, because then there are people who have similar interests and you can talk about different opportunities. Like Kelsey said, once you're in your lab, if there are grad students or other people who are a little bit more senior to you, finding out what they're interested in, kind of how did they get to that path? Are they happy where they are? And then obviously also talking to faculty and seeing their career trajectories. You're talking to people at multiple different levels. Sometimes people think you can only have a mentor who's super senior to you and has a lot more experience, but you can have like mentoring or seek advice from people all the time. I have so many like peer mentors from people who are the same level of training, and that can be extremely helpful as well.
Also, I did want to chime in again really quick that I know at least at UNC, they have this program called WINspire, where actually high school students, you can go work in a lab for 6 weeks over the summer and they pay you. And they actually pay you pretty well, I think. And I know a few of my friends who volunteered like as grad students, they'll mentor you and you'll work on a project. I just looked it up and I can send the link to anything through the chat in case anybody's interested in that. I know that's just through UNC. I'm sure a lot of other universities have similar programs as well.
Thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and thank you for sharing the link. That's awesome. We have maybe 10 more minutes left, so I just want to give a final call for anybody that might want to step on the video and ask, or in the chat box. Corinne's our Young Women in Bio ambassador, one of our YWIB ambassadors, so shout out to her. All right. If there's nothing, then I actually have a question to kind of, I think it might be a nice one to wrap up on. So has there been a time in your career in STEM where you felt you didn't have a voice in the workplace because of your gender? If so, how did you overcome that?
So I know that it does happen. I've actually been very fortunate that it's never happened to me. My issue is I'm very quiet and introverted, and I just need to work on speaking up. But if I do speak up, I've been lucky in wherever I've been for science. I've had hobbies, like I was playing chess in high school and nobody took me seriously and they regretted that. But I've been really fortunate to have a lot of great mentors, like at every step. My family's been very supportive. So luckily for me, it hasn't happened. I think having like a woman mentor like helps. I mean, even grad school, my postdoc, when I joined, she is so strong and so smart, and I wanted to be, I mean, if I could just be like her, I would be so happy. So I think finding people at your school that you want to look up to, and then if you have issues and if you've formed a rapport with them, like if someone approached me, I would totally like fight for them. Like, so I think trying to find and build your community could help. Because I had that, and so at least if I knew if I had any issue, I'm sure I could have gone to them. But
Any other comments from the panelists on that question?
I would say occasionally in medicine, I have had issues with that. When I was in med school, I occasionally would get the advice of there are certain careers in medicine that are more conducive to being a woman because they're better work hours and they're better if you want to have a family and that sort of thing. And they're like, are you sure you want to do internal medicine? Maybe you would rather do, something that's more 9 to 5 if you have kids or that sort of thing. And I think a lot of that, you have to stay true to what you want to do. You can certainly, whatever your family looks like in the future, you can still do them in all sorts of different STEM and medicine fields. So I wouldn't let, those single voices kind of drown you out there, and then stay true to what you're actually truly interested in, because even if you're doing a job that's more conducive to a family, but you're not happy, what's the point? And just trying to keep that resilience going. I still occasionally, you run into things in medicine too, where patients would be like, as a woman doctor, sometimes being taken seriously occasionally can be a problem. Not usually by other physicians, but sometimes if patients are used to seeing the older white man doctor and you're, on the slightly shorter side and you're young and you're a woman, they're like, well, where's the attending physician? When's my doctor gonna come in? Are you the nurse? And I'm like, no, like I am the doctor. I'm going to be the person talking to you. And so just trying to, again, staying true to who you are and have confidence in your own skills and what you're able to do. And that will shine through. And then over time, building up allies around you. And then usually most of the time, other people on your team also help kind of stand up for you and that sort of thing. But it can be, I wouldn't let that deter you from going into medicine or anything like that, but it just letting you know that it does happen and you have to be honest with yourself and what you want and take the other opinions with a grain of salt as you can and try to kind of work through that.
Thanks, Julie. Does Kelsey Marie want to touch on that at all?
I also have been similarly fortunate. I know it has been a problem for other women, but thankfully for myself, it has not. Kind of similar to Laura, I've always kind of gravitated towards like female mentors, and they've been really fantastic at just kind of pushing me to be more, similarly, more assertive and speak up for myself more. And I think sometimes like having a female mentor, they're sometimes better at recognizing that. And so that's been very beneficial for me.
I think I've had variable experiences. So I've had really amazing environments where I felt valued and on equal footing with everyone. And I've also been in situations where it was very clear to me that I was being overlooked or ignored, or, you know, you say something and then someone else says the same thing and then they're like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. And if I was to say the two things, and I think everyone's pretty much touched on it, the two things that I think helped me get through those is one, knowing my worth and my value and what I brought to the table, and like reminding myself of that, or being surrounded by peer mentors, or, you know, really these are your friends who remind you of how, you know, how much you've achieved and how amazing you are and how you deserve to be here, if that makes sense. And it seems like a minor thing, but it really does make a big difference to have other people validate that. And then I think the second thing is also speaking up for yourself. But I know there's this big push telling women to be assertive and to do more and to, you know, speak up and speak your mind, which I think is wonderful. I also think that it has to be in an environment that allows that to happen. But I'm basically trying to say that sometimes leaving and trying to find an environment that is conducive and welcoming and, you know, where you can have a voice and can have a place to speak up is also okay. So, you know, I know everyone says persevere and push and work hard. You know, a job is just a job at the end of the day. I know we all look for our passion and we want it to be our life, and I think that's wonderful. There's so many ways you can express that. And so if you're in an environment where you feel you're experiencing these sorts of, you know, whatever they might be, forms of discrimination based on who you are, sometimes it's okay to leave and find an environment, you know, and ask those questions in interviews and ask people who work there about their experience, to really make sure that you're entering a place where you can shape, you know, nowhere's perfect, but where your voice will be heard when you know, are assertive and speak up and all of that as well. So.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone for speaking to that. I think the main message is just to have our, you know, confidence in ourselves and the support system. And that for me, Women in Bio has been such a wonderful personal support system for me. So yeah, I really appreciate everyone speaking on that. So we only have about 2 minutes left, so I think we'll probably wrap it. I think Corinne is addressing some of the questions about that, some other applications that might be available for those that might be interested. I think Rose did ask about what would be the best thing to do to plan ahead in high school. So maybe we can take 1 minute if someone wants to kind of briefly speak on that. I think we kind of covered it a little bit more or less, but if anybody has, any of the panelists have anything to add or specific, feel free.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of anything else. I mean, I think we covered everything. I mean, just you try to build a network if you can, do some cool experiments like science project, just anything you can find like this. I wish I had this type of group when I was in high school because I didn't have anything like it. And so the fact that you're here, you kind of are already planning for it. You're doing the first steps. And I think that's great. You should be ever proud of yourself that you're doing it and like spending time on a Saturday here too to do it. So I think you're on the right track. And it's going to be exciting to see where everybody ends up in the future.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm going to hand over to Caitlin to wrap some things up just really quick with the event for today. But I personally just want to thank our panelists. It's been a pleasure, you know, just even for me to hear your answers, and I wish you the best in all of your future endeavors and everything you're doing. All of the careers sound super amazing. So, and thank you so much for taking time this Saturday to speak with us. We really appreciate it.
I think I'm unmuted. Am I unmuted? Okay, so yeah, thanks everybody for coming. I'm just gonna show the slide right here. If you want to follow us on Instagram to learn about future events. So we do lots of events. They are free to join. Anybody can join, even if you don't live in the RTP area. So last month we did an event on synthetic biology. We've done other events that were focused just specifically on medicine. So we do lots of different things. So I'd really highly suggest following us on Instagram to hear about our future events. Once COVID is over, we'll probably go back to doing in-person events in 2022, hopefully, we'll see. So when we do in-person events, sometimes we tour companies, we go to research labs. So that's like really cool stuff. So it's good just to keep up with us. And then our YWIB ambassador program, applications are open and you can either go to this website, email us, or scan this QR code. Corinne, I don't know if you're still on here. I don't know if you want to speak for a few seconds about your experience with YWIB ambassadors, but I think it's a really great program to explore your interest in STEM, gain some leadership experiences, and really extend your network of other high school girls that are interested in STEM.
Yeah, I can speak on it really quickly. So I think one of my favorite parts about the YWIB ambassador program was working with all of the other ambassadors. Everyone's just so excited and passionate, not only about science, but about leading different initiatives, such as like planning events like this one, or people were working on merch, or let's see what else.
You guys also, the national organization also had like some specific like workshops for you guys. Like, did they ever have
those were really interesting as well. Another part of the program is that you get to go to like ambassador only events, and there was we learned about some really cool researchers at the Broad Institute, and also just a lot of really inspiring people, both working with the other high schoolers and all of the YWIB leaders. I think it's a really encouraging, inspiring experience. I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have about the ambassadorship if you want to direct message me. But yeah, I thought it was great. And we got to do that synthetic biology event last month. And that was a really fun experience. So highly recommend it. You guys should apply.
Yeah, thanks, Corinne. So I'll leave this slide up just for a few minutes as you guys log off in case you need any of these links. I just want to thank the panelists again for taking time out of their schedules to talk to you all. And thank you guys for attending, especially on a Saturday. I hope you guys learned a lot. And with that, the event will conclude and you guys can log off whenever you want. We'll stay for a couple minutes just to leave the slide up. But thank you, everyone. Panelists, you guys, if you guys are still here, we can email out the panelists email addresses as well, in case you guys have any follow-up questions. I will do that.
Yes, thank you. I forgot to mention
I forgot about that. I'll give it to the Enlo, I'll give it to Ella. I'll send it to the email. And then if you signed up through Young Women in Bio, I will have the national organization send out the email. So you might not get them until Monday, just because the national staff won't be back to work until Monday. Okay, thank you. Bye, Corinne. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Corinne.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
You guys can panel
Thank you.
log off.
Thank you all.
A second. Thank you, everyone. I hope you guys have a good weekend.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.
Hi, thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks. It's just us, Doreen. Okay, cool. Let me stop the share. Okay. No, we're still, YWIB's here. For some reason, only Doreen was showing up. Okay, cool. I think that went really well.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, great interactive panel. I thought the comments and questions were fascinating. I mean, it was personally interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for the girls, it was just a great, sort of variety, right?